We're going to jump right in here and we're going to talk about obstacles to intimacy first. This is a huge, huge topic. And the reason why this is so important is manyfold. And most of the folks who I work with are in recovery from sex addiction or chronic infidelity or betrayal trauma, and a process of healing from betrayal trauma. And that makes intimacy particularly needed because of the effects that it has. And so just speaking to that right off the bat, we know that addiction is often a barrier to intimacy since the hijacking of the brain weakens the functioning of the frontal cortex. So we know it's very, very clear that intimacy is a function of the prefrontal cortex in many ways. That kind of grown-up adult-to-adult intimacy that we think about. And it's also very clear from the research that we understand, that we know, that addiction hijacks the brain in such a way that the frontal lobe is exiled, turned off, hijacked, that kind of thing. And that makes intimacy in the midst of addiction very, very difficult. And you can see on my slide here, I've got this note, two little subpoints there: immediate consequences and developmental consequences. And what I mean by that is that if I am in active addiction, there is a moment by moment consequence of, in this moment, I am in active addiction. In this moment, my frontal lobe is not fully functioning. It has deficits. It's largely offline. Again, lots of terminology could be used for that. But right here, right now, as I'm in this active addiction, this part of my brain that's responsible for things like self-reflection, appreciation for complexity and nuance, empathy, impulse control, social and moral reasoning, all of those things, is not working properly. And so it has this effect right there in the moment. But it also has developmental consequences, meaning over time, there's a cumulative effect to the addiction and the consequences of the addiction. And especially if the addiction grows out of very early traumas, or if the addiction was onset at an early age, late adolescence, early adulthood, it can actually impair the development of different parts of the brain, including the frontal cortex. So there's both this immediate, like right here, right now, I'm in my addict thinking and I'm not going to be a very good partner for intimacy. But also, if I've been in addiction for some time, that means that even when I'm not in active addiction thinking, that part of my brain maybe has had some developmental consequences to it, and I'm going to struggle with intimacy. Now, let's talk about the experience of betrayal trauma, because betrayal is also often a barrier to intimacy since it is experienced as both psychological trauma and attachment wound. And both of those are really important to understand. There are immediate consequences and longer-term consequences involving intimacy. The immediate consequences are those moment-by-moment trauma triggers that can happen, right? So we begin to get close, but I remember, wait a minute, I was close to you before and you hurt me, right? Or we're having a moment of connection, we're doing okay, we're being collaborative, and then something, and we know how trauma triggers work. It could be anything. It could be a song on the radio. It could be recognizing, oh my goodness, it's this particular date, which is a significant anniversary. There's so many things that it could be, right? But that trigger happens, and what happens? Frontal lobe largely offline, right? Same kind of mechanics or consequences as with the addiction. Frontal lobe largely offline. I'm going to be very survival driven at that point. But there are also longer term consequences from betrayal trauma. And that's the restructuring of one's timeline, one's identity, and relationships. All of these things are involved in intimacy. One's timeline, identity, relationships, these all feed off each other, inform one another in various ways, okay? With betrayal trauma as well, yes, there's the immediate obstacles to intimacy, but there's the long-term ones as well. What does it mean that this has happened? Who am I that you could do this to me? Who are you that you could do this to me? What is my story really? What is our history together? What can I believe, trust, count on from our time together versus, or in light of, is a better phrase, what I now know and what I now understand.